Dregs, what's going on, buddy? How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. How are you guys?
We're decompressing over the weekend, dissecting what's transpired in this market. We're doing well, though. Your thoughts on Steven Lorentz on the top line here with Matthews and Marner?
Well, I mean, it's clearly Craig Berube just trying to shake things up a little bit, right? It was interesting, the takeaway from Saturday night's no-show against the Vancouver Canucks. I mean, that one was, as Berube explained afterwards, just, emotionless. There was no energy in that game. There didn't seem to be a whole lot of direction. You got that from Chris Tanev. So I think this is just, the head coach not delivering a message, but just shaking it up a little bit. What's wrong with throwing an energy guy like Steven Lorentz up into the top six? And in this case, with the best players, what is you can't have a repeat performance from what we saw Thursday against the Carolina Hurricanes after the first 10 minutes. And a game like Saturday, where it's an all-Canadian matchup. You've got the Vancouver Canucks, who had to deal with a little bit of travel adversity come in. And on home ice, there's just no emotion in that game. You can't have that. So why not try something different?
Yeah, and you think the Leafs are falling victim right now, Dregs, to just the dog days of the season, and they're positioned pretty well. They know where they sit, and they take a couple days off. Is that concerning to you, or is there more to it than that?
No, I don't think there is a whole lot more to it unless it continues, right? And let's give them the benefit of the doubt and believe that it can't and it won't, because the body of the work suggests that it shouldn't, right? I look at the play of that top line. I thought when Matthews came back after the latest aggravation that he was playing his best hockey of the year. Like, physically, you could see where he was swinging at pucks and he was diving and he was doing all the things physically that we're used to seeing him do. Marner, even with Matthews on the sidelines, was the driver of the team. From a point perspective, power play 5-on-5. I mean, he just seemed to grab this team offensively by the nose. But, in the last 3-4 games, we haven't seen as much of that. So I think, Rosie, it does have a little bit to do with the dog days. And every team, it doesn't matter if you're fighting for a division lead, top spot in the National Hockey League, or you're a bottom dweller, you go through these stretches, don't you, where you've got a 3 or a 4 or a 5-game stretch where, you know what? You win a couple in those 5-game segments that maybe you shouldn't have, but you don't allow a 5-game seg to turn into anything more than that. The good teams don't. So that's why I wasn't surprised by what I saw Berube do earlier today. But I am intrigued to see what he's going to do in game and what other adjustments he may have to make.
What did you make of Marner's post-game comments?
I was a little surprised, to be fair. I don't know if it was Marner trying to deliver a message that, guys, it really wasn't as bad as what you think it is or what some others think. That's also, minutes after, the game had ended. It was a complete separation from what we heard from Chris Tanev and what we heard from the head coach. And so I can take snippets of what Marner said and I can apply that to what I saw against Carolina and how he feels like in certain areas they were better against the Vancouver Canucks, maybe, but I'm not really buying what he's selling. And look, this isn't a PR push by me by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not sure I'd have had him out there post-game after the Vancouver game. Because you know what the message is going to be. You have a pretty good handle on what Berube is going to say post-game. So you go to a veteran player like Chris Tanev. Maybe you go to Morgan Riley or Oliver Ekman-Larsson or somebody else. Like Mitch, and the captain is different. Austin Matthews pretty much has to be accountable from a PR perspective day in and day out. That's part of the leadership and the pressure that comes with wearing the C of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I don't know that Marner has to be out there every single day. If he does, maybe you say, hey, Mitch, I have thoughts on what you're going to say going out there, and you police it, you manage it a little bit better, because unfortunately for Marner, even though I think we can read into what we think he was trying to say. for the last couple of years, unfairly, I might submit. I understand the lack of playoff production and why he has been vilified at times, but he's that beacon in this city, right? He just is. And no matter how well he plays, the points he puts up, just a mere slip, if we're willing to call it that, in a post-game comment, has all the naysayers and his critics coming out swinging, because it did feel like a disconnect and almost an assault on our reality who watched the game.
Yeah, I think poor timing from old Mitchie sums it up for me. Trying to do something a little different, stay positive, it ends up blowing up in his face, as he doesn't seem to be great with that kind of thing. But staying with the theme of Mitch, who's involved, this power play, I'm starting to genuinely worry about it. It cost them the series last season, you could say, with numbers that are like under 5%, like abysmal. Bring in a guy to try to fix this or get it back on track, and it's been nothing but as bad or worse. What's your level of concern about the Maple Leafs power play?
Well, how can you not be concerned, right? Because, as you guys know, when you get into the tough games and you get into the playoffs, as difficult as it is to earn the man advantage of the power play, when you've got the talent that Craig Berube has access to with the Toronto Maple Leafs, it can't be that bad. It just cannot be. It's got to find a way to just click every now and again. And what we've seen in the last few games, especially, and it goes deeper than that, but maybe it's more glaring because we're really driving this thing to the microscope, right? Is that there's a disconnect. Like there's just a lack of feel. There's a lack of everything. I'd like to have access to Mark Savard, to be fair. I mean, he's the coach of the power play. I've yet to meet an NHL head coach who doesn't have influence or some level of say over what the structure of that power play looks like. And to me, that's what's most glaring. Is at times it does look like it lacks structure, and it lacks any sort of direction as to, okay, look, and you heard Berube preach on this early in the year. Like, why does it always have to be, the most kind of theatrical power play in the league? And they're not trying to do that now, but sometimes it's just simple, right? Get the puck to the net, find a way, put a big body like Matthew Nyes or somebody else out front that's going to do the damage. They had Matthews net front. I like the look of that. There's nothing wrong with that. He can get a deflection here or there. So it's going to be a constant work in progress, but I'm more curious as to why it hasn't worked and what they're working on to try and figure it out. Is there too much being put in the heads of these players or not enough? Rosie, one thing that players like, and it doesn't matter if it's penalty kill, 5-on-5, or the power play, you do have to have a certain amount of structure that you can lean on. Just the simple stuff on a power play. Okay, well, it's not working, so let's go back to this. And then slowly but surely you generate your confidence off that, and maybe it does start to click.
For sure. And I mean, I'm no power play expert, but I've been around a lot of them. I've seen a lot of them. And when they're struggling as bad as a team is like this for a prolonged period of time, you would think that you could visually see them trying to simplify, trying to stick to a certain thing just to get back to the roots, see if you can get something going and then take off from there. But I don't see that. I don't see what their breakout, their entry, their setup. I don't see it being the same way twice. I see them coming up different sides, setting up with different guys, different looks all the time. And I just sit there and question going, what are they talking about in between games? Like, clearly they know what their numbers are. They know they're not scoring on the power play and it's floundering and it hasn't been what the expectations are. So, and what have they done about it? And I just don't see a whole lot at all, to be honest. It still feels like they're freewheeling it, making it up as they go.
Yeah, and I'm with you, and that's why, again, it'd be nice to hear from Savard, or I mean, Berube is clearly the guy that delivers the message from a coaching perspective, and he's probably growing tired of trying to have to explain it. Maybe what Marner was talking about, again, if he reflects on the Vancouver Canucks game solely, was that Carolina game prior, Toronto was giving up shorthanded chances left, right, and center, that's just unacceptable. That's unacceptable. There was less of that in the Vancouver game, but still it didn't produce. So we need to hear more as to what they're working on. And sometimes that gets delicate too, right? The coach is planning some sort of strategy for the next game he's about to play. He's not going to open his book to the media and say, okay, well, here's what we're going to try tonight, because this hasn't worked for the last 10 games. So it's clearly a work in process.
Do you get the sense that Mark Savard's on the hot seat, or do you think this organization could be proactive in trying to help figure this thing out? Like, I've been bringing up the name a guy you work with right now in Bruce Boudreau. Like, why wouldn't you? I mean, there's no cap for personnel or coaches, right?
Yeah, I hear you. And look, we in the media always want to try and fix from the outside, because when you fire a coach, there damn well better be somebody better that you're bringing in to replace that coach. I don't think that's happening anytime soon. I just don't. I don't believe that for a second. And I do think that the answers are there internally. And look, I mean, not to bring up a ghost from the past, but one thing I often used to give Mike Babcock credit for, this is going more back into the Detroit Red Wings days, when he had access to Nick Lidstrom and Pavel Datsyuk and Henrik Zetterberg and all these great Red Wings players. I remember walking by, and it might have been in the playoffs. I guess it must have been walking by the coach's office and seeing Babcock with those guys in front of a monitor. And he came out after the fact, and I said, "Hey, like, what were you doing there with those three guys?" And he goes, "Well, I was trying to get what they're seeing, what their ideas are to fix the power play." And he goes, "I'm not out there. I don't see what they see. So I want their input so that I'm a smarter coach when, I call the group together." Is that happening on a regular basis with Savard and Berube and Matthews and Marner and all these great hockey minds within the Maple Leafs? I assume it is. So, Nick, I don't believe that there's anything imminent in terms of a personnel change. And look, you often will see in season where a coach will take over duties, right? Berube may not like the messaging, the direction, and maybe Savard pushes back on occasion because, hey, that's my turf. You stay out of my turf. And the head coach said, "No, hold on a minute. I'm the head coach. I'm going to make the call." I'm sure there have been some difficult conversations, but I don't think you'll see a personnel change anytime soon.
Dregs, as we head, closer and closer, yeah, it's the dog days, but you know how quick they go. The first half come and gone, and we're into the second, but the trade deadline is going to be here before we know it. Not really a secret that the Leafs are looking for, depths at center. Is there any name that maybe people haven't talked about that are on your radar?
Not really, to be fair. I mean, the one thing that collective media does a good job of is sorting through individually across the 32 teams the names that you conceivably can see in play. And really that's what managers and pro scouts do too, right? You assemble your list, and a lot of times it's contractually related. Who's on expiring contracts, who's going into the final year of their deal, guys that you think you can afford, maybe a guy that appears to be a perfect fit. And when you boil it down for the Maple Leafs, I mean, what we're looking at here is a prototypical third line center. Now, the third line center that might be the most affordable, seems like a decent fit for the pro scouts or for management, may not be the same guy that, say, Craig Berube is looking at, right? When you visualize the type of game that Berube wants to play, it's that heavier style. He's going to want somebody in that bottom six at center who can play that heavier game. So when I'm looking at the list of names out there, and I threw out Ryan Strome the other day, I know others have talked about him. There's this hint of what if a Ryan O'Reilly was willing to come back to Toronto. I mean, go down the list of the players that could be in play. You're talking about a class of players, Scotty Laughton of the Philadelphia Flyers, who come in around that 6'1" range. Well, I mean, that's not a small player, but I look at Nick Bjugstad, depending on what happens with Utah. He's 6'5". I mean, he would tick a lot of boxes, I think, from a management standpoint and a coaching perspective, assuming that Utah is going to have any interest in moving a player like that.
I think naturally, do you know what this team is open to dealing? Like, are they open to Minton, Cowan? I know they're pretty scarce in picks as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting into the Minton or the Cowan conversation, certainly Fraser Minton, I think that's a high rent conversation, isn't it? And that's when you're looking down the highway and you're looking at Dylan Cousins, or you're looking at a bigger piece where it's going to take multiple assets to make a trade like that. I know the Maple Leafs have a ton of time for both those kids in Fraser Minton and in Easton Cowan, as they should. And I don't think that Brad Treliving wants to move off his first-round draft pick. Not saying he won't. He may have to, depending on who the right piece is. But look, I mean, Philadelphia, again, to use Scotty Laughton as Exhibit A, the Flyers don't necessarily love the idea of trading Scott Laughton because he's a great mentor type player for their young guys. He's good in so many different areas. And prototypically, when you look around the league, he's viewed as a third line center. Yet you look at the last few weeks anyway, he's been on the wing for the Philadelphia Flyers. Noah Cates has kind of developed and evolved into that center. And I don't think Toronto, like a lot of general managers, True Living, isn't interested at this stage in giving up a first-round draft pick for Scott Laughton. So, Nick, it's still pretty early, but when you're thinking of trade and you're thinking of the pieces that Toronto needs, if you're not willing to part with a good draft pick or a decent prospect or a good young NHL player, then chances are you're not going to get the piece that you're looking for, you're looking to add when the playoffs come around.
Well, this you're right, and this year is unique too with the Four Nations. I just had a couple more from you.
Yeah.
Do you expect league-wide activity over the next couple weeks? I know a lot of people have been indicating maybe there's like a secondary trade deadline ahead of the Four Nations.
Yeah, and I don't know what to think of that or what to make of it. I think that there wouldn't be many general managers who are sitting there going, all right, well, hey, Four Nations is right around the corner. It'd be great if we had our roster set so that everybody had a break and a reset during the Four Nations. We come back after that, pedal to the metal, let's get ready for the playoffs, as opposed to the guy who's like, well, no, you know what? I'm just going to sit tight. I mean, when the deal is in front of you, that makes sense and you can afford to make that deal, you make that deal. That's what it boils down to. In certain situations, like the Maple Leafs, where you're a cap team, it does come down to affordability and dollar in, dollar out. So is that perfect scenario in front of Brad Treliving now? Will it be before the Four Nations takes hold of the league? We don't know that. What I do know is that he's constantly on the phone, like most general managers, and works pretty hard at trying to find the right fit. But I'm reminded of the deal that Billy Guerin and the Minnesota Wild made with the Columbus Blue Jackets for Juracek going to the Wild. And we had Guerin on our podcast to talk about just, his philosophy, which he learned, by the way, from Jim Rutherford while in Pittsburgh. And he said, I always go into a trade conversation thinking, all right, what's the best case to make this fair so that both sides win the trade? And that's how you get a return customer. And you feel good about the trade that you made because you didn't try and fleece the other guy. That's why deals don't often get done, is because one team digs in thinking, well, I can't give up that asset. If I give up that asset, then I didn't win the trade. Maybe it's a wash at best. What's wrong with a wash? If you can get a player that makes your team better and you've got to give up a quality asset to acquire that player that makes you better right now, do it. That's how I would hope a lot of general managers do their jobs, and I'm not sure many do.
And just to wrap, Dregs, Anthony Stolarz starting to think about his return. Do you have anything concrete on his timeline?
Not really. And let's throw Jake McCabe into that mix too, right? I like the approach here with McCabe. If we start with him, they have to be smart with this type of injury, right? I mean, there's history now with McCabe. So I doubt very much like we'll see him before Saturday. I think Saturday is what, the Montreal Canadiens.
Yep.
And how do you target any game? But that's likely the best case scenario. Stolarz getting set to skate. It's going to be, how does he feel? And then how quickly can he get into their normal practice routine? And then what way do you go from there? Does he need 2 practices? Does he need 3 before you fire him back into the rotation? I think they're certainly not going to rush him. So to say that, well, if Toronto doesn't turn this thing around, then maybe that expedites his return. Nope, they can't do that. They know what they have in that 1-2 tandem of Stolarz and Woll, or Woll and Stolarz. They loved it when those two guys were healthy and they could rotate. So regardless of what his situation is, the fact that he's ready to get back onto the ice is great, but he won't be pushed or rushed back. I was told that, they were hopeful that he could play a game in January, and that was a few days ago. Worst case, early February. And I'm not sure they've deviated from that. So maybe it gets a little better when he is back on the ice and back in practice.
Dregs, you're the absolute best. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Okay, guys. Thank you. Be well.
Appreciate
You
it
as well. Make sure to check out more of our content right here on the Leafs Nation YouTube page. We got long form interviews, we got clips, we got epic rants by Jay Rosehill. We simply have it all. And don't forget, you can find out much more at theleafsnation.com. Thanks so much for watching.